morning and welcome to Breaking News. I am JAIRA BUENCONSEJO.
And I am CALVARIO.
And
we
serve you news with no recline,
no exception,
bringing nothing but actuality in 15 minutes. The coronavirus pandemic has brought many countries to stand still. Reporter ABSALUD, can you give us an introduction about this COVID-19 pandemic and how is the vaccine approved and licensed?
Yes, thank you, Ms. BUENCONSEJO. According to World Health Organization, coronavirus disease or COVID-19 is an infectious disease caused by a newly discovered novel strain of coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2. It has the symptoms type sore throat, cough, and fever. Here are some ways to prevent the spread of COVID-19 according to the Department of Health. What is clinical trial? A clinical trial is a type of research that studies a test or treatment given to people. Clinical trials study how safe and helpful tests and treatments are. When found to be safe and helpful, they may become tomorrow's standard of care. It is carefully designed, reviewed, and completed. Clinical trials can study many things, such as new ways to give drugs, such as in pill form, use of alternative medicine, such as herbs and vitamins, new tests to find and track disease, and drugs or procedure that relieves symptoms. How is a vaccine approved and licensed? Every vaccine must go through an extensive testing to ensure its safety before it can be introduced in a country. An experimental vaccine is first tested in animals to evaluate its safety and potential to prevent the disease. Then it is tested in human clinical trials in 3 phases. Once the result of clinical trials are available, a series of steps is required, like including reviews of efficacy, safety, and manufacturing for regulatory and public health policy approvals before a vaccine may be introduced into our national immunization programs. Thank you very much.
Vaccine development is a long, complex process, often lasting 10 to 15 years and involving a combination of public and private involvement. The current system for developing, testing, and regulating vaccines developed during the 20th century as the groups involved standardized their procedures and regulations. According to Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, there are 6 general stages of the vaccine development cycle. The first one is the exploratory stage. The second one is the preclinical stage. The third one is the clinical development. This stage has 3-phase process, which will be further discussed by Ms. Alcantara. The fourth one is the regulatory approval. The fifth one is the mass manufacturing, and the last one is the quality control.
For clinical development, it is a 3-phase process. In Phase 1, limited trial, small groups of people receive the trial vaccine. While in Phase 2, expanded trial, the clinical study is expanded and vaccines are given to people who have characteristics such as age and physical health, similar to those for whom the new vaccine is intended. And in Phase 3, large-scale trial, the vaccine is given to thousands of people and tested for efficacy and safety.
Thank you, Reporter ABSALUD. Currently, we have more than 50 COVID-19 vaccine candidates in trials. Reporter Alcantara, what are currently the vaccines available, and can you give us a brief background about these vaccines?
The vaccines that are currently available are first the AstraZeneca, then the Novavax, Pfizer-BioNTech, Moderna, Sinovac, KAHLEA, and the COVAX facility.
Thank you, Reporter Alcantara. President of Russia Vladimir Putin announced on August 13 the release of the Sputnik V vaccine. They are the first country to grant regulatory approval to COVID-19 vaccine. Reporter Andres, APIADO, and ARRIOLA, can you tell us the background of this vaccine, the clinical trials involved, and the issue that arises regarding these vaccines?
So for the background of Russian vaccine, Russia is the first ever country to grant regulatory approval to COVID-19 vaccine. And this was announced by President Vladimir Putin on August 30. So the Sputnik V is a vaccine developed by the KAHLEA Research Institute in coordination with the Russian Defense Ministry. So the vaccine is expected to provide immunity from SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, for up to several years. The vaccine is administered in 2 doses and consists of 2 serotypes of human adenovirus, each carrying S antigen of the new coronavirus, which will enter the human cells and produce an immune response.
In the clinical trial of the Russian vaccines, the Phase 1 and Phase 2 was completed on August 1, 2020, and all of the volunteers are feeling well. No unwanted side effects were observed. Now another trial, consisting of 40,000 people from Russia, was completed on August 25, 2020, and the same has happened too. All the volunteers are feeling well and no unwanted side effects were observed.
Last December 3, 2020, the CNN News World reported that the United Kingdom has become the first Western nation to authorize a COVID-19 vaccine, a landmark moment in the coronavirus pandemic that paves the way for the first doses to be rolled out across the country. Because of this, President Vladimir Putin immediately responded by demanding the officials to do the same with Russia's counterpart Sputnik V, which was registered last summer but has proved difficulty in producing mass scale. The Kremlin, a fortified complex in the center of Moscow in Russia, sees the development and production of COVID-19 vaccines as a political race in the West. The issue with Sputnik V, however, is not the development but rather the production of vaccines to the required level. Over the summer, the officials have promised 30 million of doses by the end of 2020. However, by the start of November, not one of the 4 companies licensed to produce vaccine Sputnik V had managed to establish a stable production line for the vaccine. As the country struggles to produce a 2-shot vaccine of Sputnik V in large quantities, Russia expects just to produce 2 million of doses by the end of 2020, down from 30 million. Dmitry Kulish, a professor at Moscow-based private research institute, Skoltech, said that they were all excited when they were promised 30 million of doses, then later said it was just a hyper-optimistic forecast. For Russia, the stakes are high as the coronavirus spreads at a record pace. In a press release, the Gamaleya National Center of Epidemiology and Microbiology in Moscow said an interim analysis of a large-scale trial underway in Russia had 92% efficacy for its Sputnik V vaccine. Yet, it also noted that the review discovered 20 total COVID-19 cases in the vaccinated and placebo groups. Unlike in Pfizer and BioNTech, they analyzed 94 COVID-19 cases to make their efficacy claim. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration wouldn't have accepted a report on 20 cases, says John Moore, a vaccine researcher at Weill Cornell Medical College. On August 11, 2020, this information about Sputnik V vaccine started spreading when the Russian Ministry of Health approved Sputnik V as the world's first vaccine against COVID-19. The approval was, by scientific standards, misleading since Sputnik V had not even begun phase 3 clinical trials. However, Russia's Ministry of Health doubled down on September 4, claiming it had manufactured the best vaccine in the world against COVID-19, which is similar when President Vladimir Putin made a similar claim during the West Africa's Ebola break, stating that Russia had invented a more effective treatment than any other available globally. So, we may ask, why is Russia doing this? Clearly, it is because of the international vaccine race. They want to be seen to be keeping up with their competitors in other countries, and clearly, it is a rushed announcement.
Thank you, reporter Andres, Apiado, and Arriola. Vaccines are the best weapon that we've got in order to combat viruses and pathogens. However, there are some ethical concerns woven into the conduct of vaccine trials in people. The ethical concerns that we recognize necessary to the ethical assessment of new vaccines are the principles of utilitarianism, justice, non-maleficence, beneficence, truth-telling, and consumers' bills of right. Here are the reporters of each ethical principle and their statements about how to resolve these dilemmas.
Thank you, Sir CALVARIO. Utilitarianism is a theory of morality also known as the greatest happiness principle. One of its principles says that an action is right insofar as it maximizes general utility. In terms of vaccination, individuals who have access to vaccines and those who are not medically contraindicated have a moral obligation to get vaccination for herd immunity. However, some people refuse vaccination from Sputnik V because they are skeptical about its efficacy or safety. It is reasonable because it can be unpredictable. After all, we do not know what possible adverse effects it may cause us in the future. To resolve this dilemma, herd immunity should be known as a collective good insofar that a large number of people should cooperate first for it to be produced. Nonetheless, vaccination also is a public good that it is impossible to exclude someone from its benefit and may produce the best outcome for the society if all will contribute. In utilitarianism, an action is right if it leads to the most benefit and least harm. Having vaccines may make us better off than having none at all.
The principle of justice states that there should be an element of fairness in all medical decisions. Fairness in decisions that burden and benefit, as well as equal distribution of scarce resources and new treatments, and for medical practitioners to uphold applicable laws and legislation when making choices. So, it could be argued that COVID-19 investigational therapeutics and vaccines are beneficial because of the potential of curing the disease or preventing it. But investigational drugs also can cause adverse events and harm. So, in utilitarianism, an action is right if it leads to the most benefit and least harm. There are 3 ethical principles of justice in healthcare, but the 4th ethical principle of justice applies to how equitably the clinical trial investigators are enrolling subjects. If they are enrolling disproportionately fewer minorities, it could be argued that trials are not meeting the standard of justice.
The principle of non-maleficence directs physicians to do no harm to patients. Physicians should not provide ineffective treatments to patients as these offer risk with no possibility of benefit and thus have a chance of harming patients. In addition, physicians must not do anything that would purposely harm patients without the action of being balanced by professional benefit. Vaccines are a powerful measure to protect the health of individuals and to combat outbreaks such as the COVID-19 pandemic. An ethical dilemma arises when one effective vaccine has been successfully developed against an epidemic disease and other researchers seek to test the efficacy of another vaccine for the same pathogen in clinical trials involving human subjects. It is a firm principle of medical ethics that an effective treatment or vaccine should not be withheld from patients if their life may depend on it. In order to resolve these issues, All decisions that should be made during humanitarian crisis must involve a balance between beneficence or doing good and non-maleficence or avoiding or minimizing harm.
Beneficence is a principle where physicians aim to help, to do no harm, and to have a duty of care to patients. The principle of beneficence is the obligation of the physician to act for the benefit of the patient and support a number of moral rules to protect and defend the rights of others, prevent harm, remove conditions that will cause harm, help persons with disabilities, and rescue persons in danger. In short, the expected outcome to the patient must always be a positive outcome. According to WHO, as the risk of communicable diseases during humanitarian emergency is often extreme, the duty of care based on the principle of beneficence demands that effective vaccinations against this disease threats should be available to those at risk. A special obligation in addition to the duty of care is the rule of rescue, the imperative that people feel to rescue identifiable individuals facing avoidable death. Humanitarian emergencies occur frequently enough to warrant timely access to an assured vaccine supply, as certain vaccine-preventable diseases have severe outcomes, including increased mortality. Balancing the principle of beneficence and non-maleficence or minimizing harm are integral to all humanitarian decision-making. It is important to recognize that vaccines may have benefits both to the individual and to others. If the vaccine has an overall net expected utility for the individual, beneficence supports its administration. Since epidemic outbreaks often emerge in settings with less resource health systems, there is a pronounced risk that any trial withholding an effective vaccine would disproportionately affect the vulnerable population that historically have been exploited for biomedical research. Clinical trials for novel vaccines may be at odds with efforts to control active outbreaks. It may be justified to conduct a trial for a candidate vaccine if it is expected to have certain advantages compared with the existing product. All decisions that should be made during humanitarian crisis must involve a balance between beneficence and non-maleficence. Only vaccines that have been proved effective and safe in routine use are likely to be considered for mass administration during the phases of a humanitarian crisis.
Principle of truth-telling. When communicating with patients, it is always best to tell the truth because the truth can gain the trust of the patient and lying or lie can create mistrust. By truth-telling, we're establishing rapport to our patients and the right to make an informed decision for himself or for herself. In the past, where the value of not doing harm was so strong, lying to the patient was considered acceptable, whereby the arguments maintained that health professionals' primary moral obligation was to help and not cause harm to patients. Today, many things have changed, and telling the truth has emerged among the most widely praised qualities of healthcare or health professionals. In contemporary biomedical ethics, providing the true information to patients is one way to enable them to make right decisions that will benefit their overall health. Lying will breach the autonomy of the person. This contradicts concepts such as patient empowerment, fair decision-making, and patient-centered care. To force or exert the truthful information on someone who might not be ready to deal with the impact of the information can be seen as unconcerned and insensible, and possibly damage the relationship between the health professionals, the patient, and the family. During this COVID crisis, allocation of the resources is a major dilemma that healthcare workers are facing. Critically ill patients are outnumbering the available life support systems in the hospitals. There are also hospitals reaching maximum bed capacities and were needed to reject to admit some patients. In the dilemma of truth-telling, the healthcare workers' decision will be primarily based with their goal to save as many lives as possible.
The Consumer Bill of Rights serves the protection of the consumers and encourages the businesses to sell products and services that will be beneficial for the both of them. There are 5 under this Consumer Bill of Rights, namely safety, having the information, the choice, voice, and redress. Relating this Bill of Rights to the recently releasing of the Russian Sputnik vaccine, it is said that the releasing of this vaccine has faced some ethical issues that violate the Consumer's Bill of Rights. But first, before going on to that, this said that consumers have these rights for the assurance of a cautious product and choice of usage. We must always remember that we have a voice or a choice on whether to wanting to administer the vaccine or not. Furthermore, certain ethical issues arises. On what I've said, it is stated that there are some issues regarding this vaccine that has arisen before. Here, the production of its large quantity and also for the second dose that can only supply some and not all of their population violates the consumer right to have access to basic needs that fall under regarding their health care. It is stated that the consumers have the rights to avail basic life necessities and able to obtain a healthy living life. It is clearly stated here that we consumers have the right to avail the product that can improve our quality of life.
Nuremberg Code. A bleak period for medicine is evoked by the Nuremberg Code, but remains an important symbol in empowering the medical profession to take a stand for its Hippocratic principle and protect citizens from unethical medical research. In order to establish new guidelines for human experiments and set new standards for human research, The Nuremberg Code, which originated from the atrocities of illegal science in Nazi Germany, was developed and strengthens the national approach to never again. The main objective of the Nuremberg Code is to safeguard human participants from the manner of brutality and exploitation. The 10 code elements are: voluntary consent is essential, the result of any experiment must be for the greater good of society, human experimentation should be based on the previous animal experimentation, experiment should be conducted by avoiding physical or mental suffering and injury, no experiment should be conducted if it is believed to cause death or disability, the risk should never exceed the benefits, adequate facilities should be used to protect the subjects, experiments should be conducted only by qualified scientists, subjects should be able to end their participation at any time, and the scientist in charge must be prepared to terminate the experiment when injury, disability, or death is likely to occur. Since informed consent is the foundation of the Nuremberg Code, it was properly regarded as protecting the human rights of the subjects. Nuremberg's primary strength was to incorporate Hippocratic ethics and the defense of human rights into one single code. Not only does the Nuremberg Code mandate physician researchers to safeguard their subjects' best interests, but it also declares that subjects should also actively protect themselves. For example, somewhat notably, in Hippocratic ethics, the subject relies on the physician to decide whether it is the best interest on the subject to end his or her involvement in an experiment. The judges provided the subject with as much authority as the physician researchers in the Nuremberg Code to terminate the experiment before its completion.
Helsinki Declaration. In some industries, such as pharmaceuticals, biotechnology, and other medical industries, companies should constantly balance the demands of new products while also testing those products in a safe manner. Many of these products and successful studies that are being tested of humans can improve the human health, while the researchers are also learning about the diseases, human behavior, and learning patterns. According to Professor Mary Drunitsky, it is important to protect the people who are participating in the research. Ethical guidelines are being established to protect the patient volunteers for clinical research and also preserves the integrity of the science. There are 3 major declarations that consist of several principles of the research that act as science and moral guidelines for using humans as a subject who agreed to be part of a research study. First is the Nuremberg Code that states that the consent of the participant is absolutely essential. It is important that the person that is involved in the study should have legal capacity to give his or her consent and has a decision to bring the experiment to an end anytime. While the Declaration of Helsinki states that the priority of the physician must be the health and the safety of the participant. It is also the responsibility of the healthcare professionals to protect their research participants even though the participants have a consent on participating. The Belmont Report also provides the guidance for treatment of human subjects in research, and it is built on both Nuremberg Code and Declaration of Helsinki with 3 key principles. The principles of autonomy states that when an individual is being asked to participate in a clinical study, they have the autonomy to decide whether they will participate in the clinical study or not, and they should be also given the sufficient information about the clinical study that is going to be done. The next principle is the beneficence. This principle states that the research must be something that is beneficial to the majority of the people and not only with the trial participants. And the last principle of the Belmont Report is the principle of justice. This principle states that all the participants on the said clinical study should be treated fairly and equally, and the participants should not be exploited.
The Nuremberg Code states that the consent of the participant is absolutely essential. It is also important that the person that is involved in the study should have legal capacity to give his or her consent and has a decision to bring the experiment to an end anytime. It also states that the experiments that are being conducted to humans must be conducted for the good of the society and should not cause any harm physically or mentally to the participants. During the actual course of the experiment, the scientist that is in charge of the experiment must be prepared to terminate the experiment anytime if he believes that the continuation of the experiment is more likely to result in injury, disability, or even death to the participant. The Declaration of Helsinki states that the priority of the physicians must be the health and safety of the participants. It is also the responsibility of healthcare professionals to protect their research participants even though the participants have a consent on participating. The Belmont Report also provides guidance for treatment of human subjects in research, and it is built on both Nuremberg Code and the Declaration of Helsinki with 3 key principles. First is the principle of autonomy. This states that when an individual is being asked to participate in a clinical, they have autonomy to decide whether they will participate in the clinical study or not, and they should also be given sufficient information about the clinical study that is going to be done. The next principle is the beneficence. This principle states that the research must be something that is beneficial to the majority of people and not only by the trial participants. And the last principle of the Belmont report is the principle of justice. This principle states that all of the participants in the said clinical study should be treated fairly and equally, and the participants should not be exploited.
Thank you, reporters, for giving us information about these vaccines and how these dilemmas are resolved. Lance, I guess this is the end of our news report.
Yes, Jaira. Developing a new vaccine is very important in order to eradicate many kinds of serious infections or diseases such as COVID-19. Even so, there are some ethical obligations that we must adhere regarding the vaccine trials. We are Group 1 from BSN 2A, and
that is our news for today.
Thanks for watching and have a great day.